Chapter 1. The Day I Smiled in Court. I walked into divorce court knowing my husband thought he had won everything, the house, the business, even our family. But what he didn't know was that one quiet signature he rushed through would change his life forever. Because the moment the judge read the final terms, his lawyer froze, his smile disappeared, and that was when I realized something powerful. Sometimes the most devastating revenge doesn't come from fighting back. It comes from letting them take exactly what they asked for. And I'm your host today, sharing a real family revenge story about silence, preparation, and the day everything finally turned. The courthouse smelled like floor polish and old paper, the kind of clean that never quite reaches the corners. I sat at the plaintiff table in courtroom 3A of the Montgomery County Courthouse in Dayton, Ohio, with my hands folded neatly on top of a thin manila folder. The folder looked harmless, almost empty. That was the point. I had learned that the most dangerous things in the world rarely looked like weapons. Across the aisle, my husband, Gavin Hartman, looked like a man waiting to collect a prize. He was 46, still broad-shouldered, still handsome in a way that played well in boardrooms and church lobbies. He wore a navy suit that cost more than my first car. He adjusted his tie like he had done this 100 times, like this was a closing meeting and not the end of a marriage. Beside him sat his attorney, Miles Ketter, a silver-haired man with a briefcase that seemed to carry its own ego. Miles leaned back in his chair, confident, relaxed, flipping through papers with the bored competence of someone who believed the outcome was already printed. On my side, my attorney, Allison Price, did not flip anything. She did not fidget. She sat very still, a woman in her mid-50s with calm eyes and a posture that made you think of a locked door. Her legal pad was blank. The pen rested in her hand like it was waiting for permission. The bailiff called the room to order. Chairs scraped, people stood. I stood too, smooth and steady. No trembling hands, no dramatic sigh. I had cried in private months ago. I was done donating tears to anyone who had not earned them. The judge entered and took her seat. Judge Elaine Carver, late 60s, gray hair pulled back, reading glasses perched low on her nose. She scanned the case file with the expression of someone who had seen every version of love turning into paperwork. Gavin kept his gaze forward, but I could feel the energy radiating off him, that smug assurance that comes from believing you have cornered someone. He had been telling people for weeks that I was giving up, that I was too tired to fight, that I was going to walk away with almost nothing because I could not handle the stress. He was not entirely wrong about the tired part. I was tired. I was tired in my bones. But tired did not mean helpless. Sometimes tired meant focused. Judge Carver cleared her throat. She began with the standard questions, confirming names, confirming representation, confirming that both parties were present. The sound of her voice was flat, procedural, like the hum of a refrigerator. It made everything feel smaller, even the end of my marriage. Miles stood first. He spoke smoothly, his words practiced and polite, presenting the agreement as if it were a reasonable business arrangement. Gavin, he said, would retain the marital home, the real estate development business, and the associated vehicles. In exchange, I would receive a lump sum settlement and move on. He did not say how he said it in our kitchen months ago when he told me he wanted the house, the company, the accounts, and I could keep our son. He had said it the way someone orders off a menu. Here in court, it sounded nicer, the same poison in a prettier bottle. Allison stood after him. She confirmed the terms in a voice that carried no emotion. She did not argue, she did not negotiate, she did not ask for more. That was the moment I saw Gavin relax. Just a fraction. His shoulders loosened, his mouth twitched like he had almost smiled. He looked at me for half a second, and in that glance I saw what he believed. He believed I was broken. The clerk began handing out documents, pages and pages, a thick stack that made the table look cluttered. Pens were offered, signatures were requested at marked lines. Gavin signed quickly, his pen moving with confident strokes. He barely glanced at the paragraphs. He had been impatient all morning, checking his phone in the hallway, tapping his foot, acting like the court schedule was an inconvenience. He wanted this done. He wanted to walk out and tell everyone he had won. I signed slowly, not because I was uncertain, but because I was careful. I had always been careful. That was why Gavin had trusted me with the books when he launched Hartman Ridge Development. That was why I knew exactly what was behind the glossy photos on the company website and the celebratory dinners he posted online. Across the room, Miles Ketter read. Unlike his client, Miles actually read. He was old school, the kind of lawyer who still believed the fine print mattered. His finger moved down the pages, his eyes narrowed slightly as he reached the back of the packet. I watched him the way you watch a storm forming on the horizon, not afraid, just attentive. He stopped. It was subtle at first, just a pause too long, a stillness where there should have been movement. He flipped back one page, then forward again. His jaw tightened. He leaned closer to the paper, as if the words might change if he stared hard enough. Gavin did not notice. Gavin was still signing, still basking, still living in the world where he always got what he wanted. Miles cleared his throat quietly, then leaned to Gavin. He said something under his breath, a few words, not loud enough for me to hear. Gavin turned his head without concern, like a man being reminded about lunch plans. Then I saw it. Gavin's face shifted. The confident sheen drained away as if someone had pulled a plug. His brow furrowed, his hand, still holding the pen, stopped mid-motion. He blinked once, slow, as though he had misheard. Miles spoke again, still low, still urgent, the kind of urgency that tries not to announce itself. Gavin's eyes flicked down to the page Miles was indicating. Gavin's mouth opened slightly and closed again. His nostrils flared, his grip tightened on the pen, knuckles whitening. For a brief second, he looked around the room like he expected someone to explain it to him. He looked like a man standing on a trap door that had just clicked. I did not move. I did not widen my eyes. I did not tilt my head. I simply watched, quiet and composed, as if I were observing someone else's misfortune. A small warmth spread through my chest. Not joy, not cruelty, just relief. The kind of relief you feel when a heavy box finally landed where you needed it to land, after you have carried it too far for too long. My smile came and went so quickly I almost wondered if it happened. It was barely there, a slight lift at the corner of my mouth, a private acknowledgement that the world was finally lining up with the truth. Judge Carver noticed the movement on the defense side. She looked over her glasses at Miles, then at Gavin. Her voice sharpened by half a notch. "Do we have a problem, Mr. Ketter?" Miles straightened, smoothing his jacket as if fabric could smooth out what he had just read. He hesitated, eyes darting to Gavin, then back to the page. Before he could speak, Judge Carver held up a hand, palm out, firm. "Counsel," she said, "we will take a brief recess. 5 minutes. Review whatever needs reviewing, then we proceed." The gavel tapped once, not dramatic, just final enough. Chairs shifted, papers rustled, people stood and murmured. Gavin stayed seated for a heartbeat too long, staring down at the page as if he could will the ink to rearrange itself. Allison did not look at me. She did not need to. Her stillness was its own promise. I rose, smoothed the front of my plain black dress, and picked up my folder. It was still thin, it still looked harmless. As the courtroom emptied into the hallway, I paused at the threshold and glanced back, taking in the wood paneling, the flags, the seal on the wall, the ordinary setting where extraordinary consequences were decided. 5 minutes, I thought. I had been waiting much longer than that. I let my eyes drift to the tall windows, to the pale autumn light, and for a moment I was back in my kitchen years ago, alone with a stack of bank statements, hearing the soft buzz of the refrigerator, seeing a number that made my stomach drop. Chapter 2. Everything I built, nothing I owned.
The memory did not fade when I looked away from the window. It followed me, pulling me backward, past the courthouse, past the hallway, past the years I had spent convincing myself that stability was the same thing as safety. I was 22 when I married Gavin. It was the summer of 2004, humid and bright, the kind of Midwest summer that makes everything feel possible. We lived outside Dayton in a starter home with beige carpet and a lawn we pretended we would landscape someday. Gavin was 27, ambitious, restless, already talking about bigger things. I was practical. I had finished my training as a legal assistant and had landed a steady job downtown. I liked order. I liked knowing where the money went. I liked the quiet confidence that came from understanding documents other people skimmed. Gavin liked that about me at first. He used to joke that I was his secret weapon. When he decided to start Hartman Ridge Development, I helped him file the paperwork at the kitchen table. I spread out forms, highlighted deadlines, explained terms. He kissed the top of my head and said he could not do this without me. At the time, I believed him. Our son Luke was born in 2008. Life narrowed in the way it always does when a baby arrives. Less sleep, more lists, more responsibility. I went back to work part-time and kept the house running. Gavin worked longer hours. He said it was temporary. He said it was for us. In 2011, Hartman Ridge began to grow. Gavin came home one night, buzzing with excitement, and said he needed me full-time. He needed someone he trusted to handle contracts, invoices, loan schedules, and calls with contractors. He said it made no sense to pay someone else when I already knew everything. I hesitated. My job was steady, my benefits mattered, but Gavin framed it like a partnership. "This is our company," he said, leaning against the counter. "We are building something together." So I quit. I rolled my retirement account into a separate plan. I moved my files home. I became the person behind the curtain. I tracked loan payments. I reviewed invoices. I kept a calendar of closing dates and permit deadlines. I sat on hold with banks. I knew which projects were barely breaking even and which ones were holding the whole thing together. On paper, Gavin was the founder. In reality, I was the one who made sure the lights stayed on. As the company grew, something shifted. Decisions stopped being conversations. They became announcements. "I have it handled," Gavin would say when I asked about a new loan. "You do not need to worry about that." When I questioned an invoice that seemed high, he smiled like I was being cute. "You are too close to this," he said. "Let me handle the big picture." His mother, Patricia Hartman, had a way of reinforcing that shift without raising her voice. She visited often, always with a comment disguised as concern. "You are so lucky Gavin takes care of everything," she would say, sipping coffee at my table. "Not everyone can afford that." Lucky. The word settled into my chest like something heavy and unwelcome. I was working longer hours than ever, just without a paycheck or a title. But I smiled. I kept the peace. I told myself this was what marriage looked like when it worked. Luke grew older. School projects replaced diapers. I became the parent who remembered permission slips and doctor appointments. Gavin became the parent who showed up when there were photos to be taken. From the outside, we looked successful. From the inside, I felt myself shrinking. By 2018, Hartman Ridge was visible enough that people recognized Gavin around town. He liked that. He started going to more dinners, more events. He talked about expansion. He talked about branding. When I asked about risks, he waved me off. "You worry too much, Marianne," he said one night, using my name like a gentle reprimand. "Trust me." Trust became a habit, not a choice. In early 2020, Gavin came home later than usual. He did not take off his jacket. He did not sit down. He stood by the kitchen island like he was waiting for a timer to go off. "I want a divorce," he said. The words did not register at first. I asked him to repeat himself, not because I hadn't heard him, but because my mind refused to arrange the sounds into meaning. "This is not working anymore," he said, his voice flat. "We both know that." I waited for the apology. It never came. He laid out his plan calmly. He would keep the house, the company, the accounts. It made sense, he said, because everything was in his name. I could keep Luke. He said it like he was being generous. I asked him what he thought I would live on. "We'll figure something out," he said. "You'll be fine." The next day, he asked me to move into the guest room, just for now. He said it was better for everyone. He asked for the joint credit card back so he could organize expenses during the transition. I handed it over, my fingers numb. That night, I opened a filing cabinet I hadn't touched in years. I pulled out deeds, loan statements, account summaries. I spread them across the dining table the way I used to back when this felt like teamwork. My name was not there. The house was in Gavin's name, the business accounts were in Gavin's name, the vehicles were in Gavin's name. Even the savings account we had built together over years of careful budgeting had been shifted at some point quietly into an account I could not access. I sat there until the house went quiet, until the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound left, staring at documents that told a story very different from the one I had been living. On paper, I had built everything. On paper, I owned almost nothing. That was when I understood something Gavin did not. He thought he was taking my future. What he was really taking was responsibility, and I was about to let him. I gathered the papers into neat stacks and slid them back into the cabinet. I did not confront him. I did not cry in front of him again. I went to bed in the guest room and stared at the ceiling, knowing that the ground under our marriage had already shifted. In the days that followed, Gavin moved through the house like a man already free. He made calls in the hallway. He smiled at his phone. He told his mother that things were under control. I watched, I listened, and I began to understand that the most dangerous assumption anyone can make is believing the person beside them has nothing left to lose. The next chapter of my life did not begin with a fight. It began with a decision to pay closer attention.
Chapter 3: The Secret I Found Before He Was Ready. I did not become suspicious overnight. It happened in small moments, the kind you almost ignore if you are not paying attention. In late 2017, I was standing at the kitchen counter sorting mail when I noticed an envelope from a lender I did not recognize. It was thin, not urgent-looking, tucked between a grocery flyer and a utility bill. I opened it without thinking, expecting a statement or a notice sent in error. It was neither. It was a confirmation of a payment, a routine acknowledgement, the kind banks send when they want a paper trail. The amount was not enormous, but it was unfamiliar. I read it twice, then a third time, feeling that subtle tightening in my chest that comes when something does not fit. That night, after Gavin went to bed, I pulled up the household accounts on my laptop. I told myself I was just checking, just being responsible. I had always handled the details. This was not new. The payment was there. It was labeled as a loan service fee, routed through an account Gavin controlled. I scrolled back. The pattern was thin but visible. Small transfers, spaced out, easy to miss if you were not looking closely. The next morning, I asked him about it while he poured coffee. "What is Summit Crest Capital?" I asked, keeping my voice even. He barely looked up. "Just a short-term lender, bridge financing. It is nothing you need to worry about." I watched his face as he spoke. No hesitation, no irritation, just confidence. "We are expanding, Marianne," he added. "This is how growth works." I nodded and let it drop, but I did not forget. Over the next year, I paid closer attention, not in a dramatic way, quietly. I printed statements and filed them. I made notes in the margins. I created a folder on my computer labeled Taxes and stored copies there. I told myself it was temporary, that once the project closed, things would normalize. They did not. In 2019, I found the second loan. This one was larger, tied to the house. I recognized the structure immediately. It was not a refinance. It was a secondary lien. That night, I did not ask questions. I did not confront him. I sat at the dining table after everyone went to sleep and ran the numbers myself. By 2021, there was a third loan, short-term, high-interest, private money. At that point, the pattern was undeniable. I called my Uncle Thomas. He had been a CPA for more than 30 years before retiring. He knew my voice well enough to hear the shift in it when I asked if I could come by. He spread the documents across his dining table, the same way I once had at mine. He adjusted his glasses and worked in silence for a long time. Finally, he leaned back.
"This is not good, Marianne," he said. "He's borrowing to cover borrowing." "How bad?" I asked. He gave me a look that was gentle and serious at the same time. "If the market hiccups even a little, this collapses." I drove home with my hands tight on the steering wheel, not angry, not panicked, just clear. The image Gavin projected was not built on strength, it was built on momentum and debt. I understood then why he brushed off my questions. If he admitted the truth, he would lose control, and control mattered more than honesty. That was the moment my role changed. I did not confront him, I did not warn him, I did not threaten anything. I simply stopped sharing my concerns and started protecting myself. The first thing I did was learn the language: separate property, inheritance, retirement accounts, trusts, estate planning. Words that sounded distant suddenly felt urgent. I scheduled a consultation with a family law attorney named Allison Price. I told Gavin I was meeting a friend for lunch. Allison listened without interrupting as I explained my situation. When she finished, she asked one question: "Have you ever mixed your inheritance or retirement funds with marital accounts?" "No," I said. She nodded once. "That matters," she said, "a lot." We talked about options, not about divorce, not yet, about protection, about boundaries, about making sure my son would be secure no matter what story Gavin decided to tell later. I set up an irrevocable trust for Luke, using only funds that were legally mine. Nothing touched our joint accounts. Everything was documented, clean, careful. When the paperwork was finalized, Allison slid the folder across the table. "This is quiet," she said, "but it is strong." I took it home and placed it in the same filing cabinet where I had begun storing copies of loans and statements. I added a new folder labeled Personal. From then on, I kept everything: emails, notices, statements, copies of signatures. I learned which drawers Gavin used and which ones he never opened. I learned how often he checked the mail and when he left it untouched. Sometimes he would talk to me about the business, confident, expansive. "We are almost there," he would say. "Once this next deal closes, everything gets easier." I smiled and nodded and asked questions that did not raise alarms. At night, I lay awake listening to the house settle, thinking about how fragile certainty really was. The hardest part was the waiting. There were moments when I wanted to scream, to throw the papers on the table and demand answers. But I knew what would happen if I did. Gavin would get defensive, he would lock things down, he would rewrite the narrative before I could finish a sentence. So I waited. I let him believe I trusted him. I let him believe I was unaware. The truth was, by the time he decided our marriage was over, I already knew exactly what he was standing on, and I also knew that the moment he thought he had won would be the moment everything became visible. I closed the filing cabinet one night and rested my hand on the metal handle. I felt calm, colder than I had ever been, but steady. I knew the secret now. I just wasn't ready for him to know that I knew that.
Chapter 4. When I let him take everything. The weeks that followed moved quietly on the surface and heavily underneath. Gavin walked through the house like someone already living in the future. I moved through it like a temporary guest, careful with every step, careful with every word. Mediation began in early spring and stretched across nearly 3 months, 10, maybe 12 weeks, depending on how you counted the gaps between meetings. Neutral offices, long tables, water pitchers no one touched, emails written in polite language that carried sharp edges underneath. In the first session, I asked for almost nothing. I sat across from Gavin, my hands folded in front of me. Dana sat beside me, calm and unreadable. Gavin's attorney leaned back, relaxed. "I just want stability for Lucas," I said. "A place to live, a clean break, no drawn-out conflict." Gavin's shoulders eased. He glanced at his attorney, then back at me. "That seems reasonable," he said. "I want this to be easy for everyone." His attorney nodded. "We appreciate your cooperation."
I watched Gavin as he spoke, the confidence in his posture, the relief in his voice. He believed the version of me he had already decided on. Tired, done, willing to step aside. After the meeting, he caught me in the parking lot. "This doesn't have to be ugly," he said. "I'm glad you see that." "I do," I said, and meant it in a way he didn't hear. The second round came weeks later. By then, the outlines of the agreement were clearer. Gavin would keep the house, the business, the vehicles. I would not ask for any ownership in the company. I framed it as practicality, not surrender. "I don't want to be tied to your business decisions," I said. "I want a clean line." His mother, Helen, sat a few feet behind him, hands folded tightly in her lap. She had insisted on being present, saying it was important to support her son and protect her grandson. "This is the mature choice," she said. "Dragging things out only hurts the child." She turned to me, her gaze steady and sharp. "You don't want to make things difficult," she added. "Courts remember cooperation, especially when it comes to parenting time." The message was clear. I met her eyes and nodded once. "I want what's best for Lucas," I said. Gavin took a slow sip of water, satisfied. The room was on his side. His attorney, his mother, the mediator. Everyone saw him as reasonable and generous. That afternoon, Rachel called me. "I talked to Gavin," she said. "I told him you just want peace, that you're not trying to take him for everything." "Why would you do that?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "I thought it would help," she said quickly. "Lower the temperature. He listens when he thinks people are being fair." "I see," I said. She meant well, I believed that. But what she had done was confirm Gavin's favorite assumption, that I was eager to be done and willing to accept whatever was offered. By the third phase of mediation, Gavin was impatient. He wrote in an email, "I want to wrap this up. We're close enough." That was when I agreed to leave with a small settlement, far less than what most people would ask for after a long marriage. I did not argue. I did not counter. I said yes, on one condition. He would keep all assets and all associated obligations. Dana lifted her eyes to me for a brief moment. Not concern, recognition. "We'll need a full audit," she said calmly. "Given the scope of the assets, that's standard." Gavin shook his head immediately. "That's unnecessary," he said. "It'll slow everything down." "It protects both parties," Dana replied. "Transparency avoids future disputes." "I'm not interested," Gavin said. "I want this finished." His attorney hesitated. "An audit might be prudent," he said carefully, "just to ensure there are no surprises." Gavin turned sharply toward him. "There won't be any surprises. I'm not doing an audit." The mediator looked between us. "We can document the refusal," she said. "Proceeding without an audit is your choice." "Fine," Gavin said. "Document it." Dana leaned slightly forward. "I need to confirm that you understand the implications. Waiving an audit means accepting the full financial picture as it stands, any liabilities, known or unknown." Gavin waved his hand. "I understand. I'm willing to take that risk." I watched him as the waiver was slid across the table, watched the way he picked up the pen without hesitation, watched how certain he was that the paper in front of him was harmless. I knew then that if there was even a single obligation he hadn't accounted for, it would belong to him alone. Every dollar, every consequence, signed into place by his own hand. Gavin signed quickly, the pen pressing hard into the page. His attorney watched, concern flickering across his face, but he said nothing more. I signed after him, my hand steady. The waiver was witnessed, filed, added to the growing stack of documents Gavin barely glanced at. After the session, Helen pulled me aside near the elevators. "This is for the best," she said quietly. "Don't make trouble later." "I won't," I said. She smiled, satisfied. In the days that followed, Gavin pushed for dates. He talked about travel plans. He told people the divorce was amicable, that I had been reasonable, that everything was handled. I continued to be reasonable. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I reviewed the paperwork one last time. The waiver, the asset list, the obligations. Everything was clean, clear, exactly where it needed to be. Gavin had spent years telling me not to worry, not to interfere, not to complicate things. Now he was asking me to trust what was written on paper. I did. I trusted the paper. The final mediation session ended with polite handshakes. Gavin looked lighter than he had in years, free, victorious. As I gathered my things, Dana leaned close. "This is voluntary," she said softly. "You understand that?" "I do," I said. "And he understands." "He thinks he does," I replied. Outside, the air was warm, the sky pale. Gavin walked ahead of me toward his car, already on his phone, already moving on. I watched him go, feeling the certainty settle in my chest. The door was closing. He just didn't realize he was the one stepping inside.
Chapter 5. He took everything, including the debt. The next time I walked into the courthouse, everything felt smaller. The hallway was the same, the benches along the wall worn smooth by years of waiting, the faint smell of coffee drifting in from somewhere near the clerk's office. But I was different. I was not carrying questions anymore. I was carrying certainty. In courtroom 3A, the same room where everything had paused weeks earlier, the air felt heavier. Gavin sat at the defense table again, his posture confident but tighter than before. He adjusted his jacket twice. His attorney, Miles, did not lean back this time. He sat forward, papers arranged with care, eyes already moving. Dana sat beside me, her presence steady. She gave me a brief nod, nothing more. Judge Carver entered and took her seat. She looked down at the file, then at us. "We are here to finalize the settlement agreement," she said. "I will ask a series of questions to confirm that all terms are understood and accepted voluntarily." Her gaze settled on me first. "Ms. Turner," she said, "have you reviewed this agreement in full?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you understand the terms as written?" "Yes." "Are you entering into this agreement voluntarily without coercion or pressure?" I paused, not for effect, but because the question deserved the space it occupied. "Yes, Your Honor." She nodded and turned to Gavin. "Mr. Turner, have you reviewed this agreement in full?" Gavin cleared his throat. "Yes." "Do you understand the terms as written?" "Yes," he said, a fraction too quickly. "Are you entering into this agreement voluntarily without coercion or pressure?" "Yes," he repeated. Judge Carver flipped a page. "Ms. Whitman," she said, addressing Dana, "please confirm disclosure." Dana stood. "Full financial disclosure was provided, Your Honor. An independent audit was formally recommended on 2 occasions and declined in writing by Mr. Turner." She handed a document to the clerk, who passed it forward. Judge Carver read silently for a moment. Her eyes lingered on one paragraph longer than the rest. "Mr. Turner," she said, "you were advised that declining an audit meant accepting all assets and all associated obligations as presented." "Yes," Gavin said. "And you declined?" "Yes." Judge Carver set the paper down. "Very well." The clerk began reading from the agreement. Itemized assets, the marital home, the development company, the vehicles, accounts, properties, each one spoken aloud, stripped of emotion, reduced to language. Then came the addendum. "Associated liabilities," the clerk read, "including but not limited to outstanding loans, liens, private financing agreements, and contingent obligations attached to the listed assets." I watched Miles as the words were read. His eyes moved faster now. He reached the end of the page and froze. He leaned toward Gavin and whispered something urgently. Gavin frowned, confused, then annoyed. "What?" he murmured, not quietly enough. Miles pointed to the document, his finger pressing hard against the paper. Gavin's face changed.
It was not dramatic, there was no outburst, just a slow realization, like a door opening to a room he had never entered. Judge Carver looked up. "Is there an issue, counsel?" Miles stood. "Your Honor," he said carefully, "we would like a brief clarification regarding the scope of the liabilities referenced here." Judge Carver raised an eyebrow. "The language is standard," she said. "Assets are transferred with their obligations unless otherwise specified. This was reviewed during mediation." She looked directly at Gavin. "You acknowledged this understanding, Mr. Turner." Gavin swallowed. "Yes," he said. The word sounded smaller than it should have. Judge Carver nodded once. "Then we will proceed." The clerk continued. The reading finished. Signatures were confirmed. The gavel came down, firm and final. The agreement was entered into record. It was over. Outside the courtroom, the shift happened quickly. Miles pulled Gavin aside, his voice low but urgent. Gavin's hands moved as he spoke, sharp, defensive gestures that drew attention. People passing slowed, curious. Helen stood a few steps away, her face tight, lips pressed together. She did not approach me. She did not speak. For the first time since I had known her, she looked unsure. My phone buzzed while I stood near the window. I did not answer it. Then it buzzed again, and again. Later, I would learn that one of Gavin's partners had called, then another. Questions about loan terms, about collateral, about why certain obligations had not been disclosed earlier. Paige did not call. She texted instead, a short message that said she needed space and hoped he understood. He did not. I left the courthouse quietly, walking past the benches, past the security desk, out into the afternoon light. The sky was pale, stretched thin with clouds. It felt like a day that did not need commentary. The apartment I shared with Lucas was small, but it was clean and bright. We ate dinner at the kitchen counter that night, takeout boxes between us. "So," he said, pushing noodles around with his fork, "is it done?" I said, "It is." He nodded, absorbing that. "Can I ask, are you okay?" I considered the question. "I am," I said. "I think I finally am." He studied my face for a moment, then smiled, just a little. "Good," he said. After he went to bed, I sat alone on the couch, the quiet settling around me. There was no celebration, no rush, just space. I thought about everything I had carried for years, the numbers, the silence, the careful waiting. I thought about how easily strength is mistaken for aggression and how often calm is confused with weakness. Gavin had taken everything he asked for, the house, the company, the accounts, and the wait. That was the part he had not seen. The next morning, I woke up without the familiar knot in my chest. I made coffee and watched the sun come up through the window. The world looked the same, but it felt lighter, like something had finally been set down. If you have ever found yourself choosing between confrontation and preparation, I would love to know which path you took or which one you wish you had taken. And if stories like this speak to you, if you believe that quiet strength deserves to be heard, I hope you will stay with me and subscribe for more.